Uh, my job is to try to make a confusing system simpler for you, and I hope I can do that, but it's not likely, because we live in a country that has dealt with the healthcare system for a long, long time, and with the advent of the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, anybody that's in the healthcare field is wondering yet still today, what does it really mean and how does it impact us? So bear with me. We're going to go through these slides, not very quickly, but we'll go through them to leave enough time at the end to have you ask questions. The committee has asked me to ask you to hold your questions until I get done, but if you really have a need to ask a question, I think, Dick, that's probably going to be okay. We'd rather have people wait.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Write it on a card.
Write it on a card.
And Bert's going to be our
I am told that you've all agreed not to throw anything at the speaker, number one. Number two, I am going to be moving around, so if you have an inclination to try to throw something, I'm going to bob and weave very quickly as best I can. So we're going to talk about that system that I made reference to. We're going to ask you to think about where you may be on that continuum, where you are today and where you might be 5, 10, or 15 years from now. We're going to talk in detail about something called a continuing care retirement community. And if some of you don't know what that acronym means, I just told you, but think about Kendall and Hanover. And many of you know of Kendall. There was a big party there this morning. Some of you had some good food there. And so think Kendall in your mind when you're thinking about a retirement community, all right? And then we're going to talk about cost, because as you all know, if you live on fixed income or you depend on the stock market to produce income for you, it may be that you need to be cognizant of cost. And the costs, by the way, are going to vary all across the spectrum. So we are not going to do an in-depth discussion about cost specific to a type facility, but these continuing care retirement communities are expensive, and there's some risk inherent in the decision to move to them, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But most importantly, the reason our dear friend Bert Kanan's on the panel, before I say any more about my dear friend Bert, how many lawyers are in the room? Well, he's going to represent the law, as he does very well, and he's not going to be very kind to me when he asks me questions. We've already had that agreement that he's leaving on Sunday to go to warmer climates, so he's going to attack me with questions or challenge statements that I might make this afternoon. Okay? You all ready? So be prepared to get confused. So this first slide is really the beginning of how we live our lives in the United States. And what I'm going to do is just not ask you to focus on this, A, because it's kind of hard, although you do have it in front of you in the PowerPoint, but very simply, think of yourself living in Quechee here. You're living in your own home, and at some point, you may move through the healthcare system, and God forbid you end up in the hospital, or you may end up in a retirement community. So the chart is intended to work left to right, and you'll see on the top there are things that say want and preventive, and then down here it's more need-driven, okay? So that's the continuum that's very confusing. The committee said, Tim, you cannot possibly take the time to dive into every one of the elements on that slide, so we're going to reduce it down to you, reduce it to a level that's a little more easy to understand, I hope. The good news for all of the consumers throughout the country as they anticipate or plan their move to a retirement community is that every legislature across the country, and it is based on unique jurisdictional control, has a regulatory environment in place. And my experience over 35 years tells me that there's not one regulation that fits all 50 states, but I can assure you that every state in this country regulates nursing homes, and that's the Health and Human Services section of the healthcare system. Most every state, not all, but most every state in the context of a retirement community, however you define it, probably regulates it through a Department of Insurance system. Because in the final analysis, when you're prepared to pay an occupancy fee or entrance fee, legislatures have decided and revenue departments have decided you're effectively buying an insurance product from the developer or the provider. So the fact is, most jurisdictions say, you're buying insurance and we're going to regulate it. And then finally, out of 1,900 retirement communities across the country, 1,500 or so are nonprofit. I've been working in nonprofits my whole career, and the good news about the nonprofit industry is it's regulated and overseen by the Attorney General in each jurisdiction. So simply put, in my experience, moving into a retirement community, you have 3 levels of protection. One is by the Department of Insurance, if indeed you're writing a check to pay an entrance fee. Number 2, if you move on that continuum that I just alluded to and end up in things called assisted living or nursing care, that typically falls under the heading of Health and Human Services. And then finally, and most importantly, for any nonprofit retirement community that's a 501c3 under the code, it typically is overseen by the Attorney General in each state. Okay? A lot of protection. We did give you references for New Hampshire and Vermont, but I'm sure you all have advisors and family members that can drill down on any of this if you want to. So remember I said at the beginning that big chart that you saw has multiple elements to the long-term care system. We're going to talk about 6 of them. Not 16 of them, but 6. And these are the 6 we're going to talk about because they're the most recognizable, but they also represent the history in the United States about caring for people that have quote-unquote aged in place. So we're going to go through 6 community definitions, and hopefully the grid will become easier. And this is what it's going to look like. Remember the first one? So we've sort of eliminated a lot of things, and we're going to talk about these elements of the long-term care continuum. Most of it, and you'll see in a few minutes, we're going to really focus on this thing called CCRC. So active adult communities really have emerged on the landscape for people 55 and older. They're really a communal type setting for people that don't want to, and you could imagine, in my opinion, that Quala could be thought of as an active adult community. And I'm not surprised, or wouldn't be surprised if somewhere in the history of this fantastic development that we've used the words active adult community. Ted, is that probably right?
Probably so.
Yeah, but this is more intentional. This is where a community or a developer or an organization says we're going to build intentionally a community geared for people at 55 years and up, and we're going to put it on one campus, and we're going to offer an array of services. Rest homes are something that have been around since the beginning of time. They often take the form of homes for the aged. The organization, and I think it's all right if I talk about where I used to work as opposed to where I work now. Is that right, Dick? I worked in Laconia, New Hampshire for 5 years, and the Taylor home was 106 years old when I got there. It's now 111 years old. And that was a place that the community of Laconia, New Hampshire, someone said we need to take care of our seniors, however you define that, and someone built a home where there were matrons and 3 meals a day and housekeeping, and that was considered a home for the aged. And look at where we are now, all this time later. For you folks that live in the area, the Westboro House in Lebanon may be familiar to some of you, and the Outreach House in Hanover is another one that would fit the definition or fit the rest home category. Very small. My grandmother lived in a place called St. Mark's Home in Augusta, Maine, and the church built a little place, had 5 rooms, and it was for seniors that couldn't live alone anymore. So they're all over the country, and they're really the forerunner to everything we're talking about today. So now it's going to get a little more complicated, and these terms may be familiar to some of them. The first one is assisted living communities. So remember that chart where you live at home, but you may need something more than, you don't want to live at home anymore, but you don't want to spend a lot of money to live in a full-blown community. You may move to what's called an assisted living community. 3 squares a day typically, some personal care and housekeeping. They can be very purpose-built. One of the largest organizations in the United States is Sunrise Assisted Living. I don't know if that name rings a bell to some of you, but standalone assisted living communities, terrace communities. There's one in Woodstock, and there are 7 or 8 others in the Upper Valley. Nothing more than assisted living. And the unit sizes, by the way, as the slide says, range from studios to 2 bedrooms, typically. A continuing care retirement community is really the, I was going to say 400-pound gorilla, but it's really, it encapsulates the entire healthcare spectrum and aging in place spectrum, and that's what we're going to talk about in a moment. Within that system of nursing home, assisted living, are also things called intermediate care facilities. Not skilled nursing homes, but nursing facilities that don't rise to the level of skilled care. Typically short stay, often take the name respite, and other services that don't anticipate long-term stays, but do provide services that go beyond assisted living and are often and most likely funded through Medicaid or Medicare. All right? Skilled nursing facilities, I presume we all know what a nursing home is. This is the sort of acronym, a SNF. That's, as you're approaching end of life, you may end up, or you may know people that have lived in a nursing home. It can be short and long-term stays. But nursing homes, I've never met anybody in 35 years when I give talks like this, when I say, how many people can't wait to move to a nursing home? I've never seen anybody raise their hand. They're fantastic facilities. They're an appropriate element of the long-term care system. We don't want to end up there. As a matter of fact, when I was talking to my colleague, Rebecca Smith at Kendall, you should know that they've decertified their nursing beds, their nursing home beds, and made it all sort of private pay, except 3 or 4 that they have skilled care for. Why? Because you all don't want to go to a nursing home. Never did, never want to, and you're going to do whatever you can, I suspect, to avoid that eventuality. And for high net worth people, which represents everybody in the room except Tim and Peggy Martin, many of you will be able to import care into your home. And you say, you know what, I'm going to stay home until I die, and you bring in services that look like 24-hour health care, meals, etc., because you just don't like the stereotyping or the imagery associated with nursing homes. My mother died in one, and I'm very proud to say that the provider did a fantastic job, but they're just not a place that you really want to see yourself in. But I dare say you probably can't avoid it unless you've got other ways to deal with that eventuality. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of water. So in this thing called, remember, think Kendall just for, and I'm not promoting Kendall committee members wherever you are. I don't work at Kendall, and I don't even know why I would be promoting Kendall, because that's counterintuitive to me, but that's another issue. And continuing care retirement communities are all over the country. And they started a long time ago when nursing home developers realized that people want more than just that nursing home piece, that there's a whole spectrum of needs as people age in place. And so when I was in Massachusetts for 28 years, the biggest developer of continuing care retirement communities were nursing home developers. That said, wait a minute, if I get folks at the end of life, maybe I should try to figure out how to get them as they're wanting to downsize and leave their own home. So they started building campuses that have the elements that I've articulated on that slide. The big difference that we'll talk about probably in the Q&A hovers around the term life care. And we're going to get to that, I know, because I think counsel for the defense is going to ask about life care. But most of these continuing care retirement communities can often be described as life care communities. But remember 2005, 6, and 7 when the economy started to waffle a little bit, and then in 2008 it really took a hit. Some of you may have experienced some of that pain. I know we did. What happened is all of the developers for CCRCs decided to change the model. So the entrance fees that many of you have heard about started to become very elastic and be very flexible in how you pay or get into a retirement community. And we'll talk about those contract differences. The pendulum has swung so far in another direction that many of these communities you can actually just rent the unit that you want to move into. You don't have to pay a large entrance fee, you just rent the 1,400 square foot townhouse and not buy into the rest of the services. Still very complicated, I'm sorry to say. So my wife, who's in the audience, said, this is silly to put these drill things up. I thought they were kind of cute, sort of, but Peggy said you shouldn't put the drills, and I'm not going to tell you which one's Peggy. But so nonetheless, we're going to sort of deep dive into three elements of a retirement community. I've talked to them a little bit, but I'm going to expand on it. In the independent living unit component, it's like living in a condo in Queechee. It ranges in size from 800 square feet to 2,500 square feet, or maybe even larger. You pay an entrance fee, you move in, and you do whatever the heck you want. You can fix the unit up the way you want. You can transform it into, take a 3-bedroom and turn it into a 2-bedroom. And the nonprofit provider generally says, it's your home, do whatever you want, but give it back to me when you leave in the condition in which you bought it. Okay? So, and the activities, again, very similar. I was talking to a former chairman of the board here. I believe that much of what we're talking about today is it reminds me of living at Queechee. Homes, services, activities, etc. And so when you're living in the independent living component, you just join all the activities. And there typically are several committees, like there are here, that run the activities. There are often dedicated staff people, activities coordinators, fitness people, but you're completely on your own to do whatever you want. The irony, in my opinion, is that when organizations say it's independent living, I believe that the fact that you moved into a campus suddenly makes you dependent upon the organization that developed it for certain things. Lawn care, maintenance, roof replacements. But nonetheless, you'll hear the term independent, and that's one of the three sort of components. Assisted, I told you about 3 meals a day. So think of that arrow on that chart. You may have to move from independent to assisted to skilled care. That's the advantage of a continuing care retirement community, because it allows you to move on the system as your needs increase. And it's very often the case, not all that often, but it's oftentimes that you can move here for short-term rehab and then move back to assisted living or ideally move back to your independent living cottage or apartment. That's the goal of most providers, and I think that that's our aim in life, is to keep people out of the nursing unit as long as possible. Witness the fact that my friend in Hanover has decertified most of their nursing beds, kept a few of them, but changed the format. In this jurisdiction, in that jurisdiction across the river, retirement communities cannot provide skilled care reimbursed by Medicaid. You all know about Medicaid. Medicaid is the federal system that enables people, when they've run out of money, Medicaid pays the bill. With the proliferation of CCRCs in New Hampshire, there are about 9 or 10 totally. The covenant between the development community and the regulators was that none of them would require the state to pay the bill for the nursing care, i.e. Medicaid. How are we doing on time, Dick?
You're doing fine.
So, lawyers, get ready. You said you were a lawyer, right? So you've decided to move into a retirement community, and the first thing I do, and all of us do in the industry, is pull out a contract. The average age on entry, by the way, in these communities hovers around 80 years old. Doesn't apply to anybody in this room, I know, but the contracts typically take 3 forms. One is that you give them anywhere, and you'll see on the subsequent slide, anywhere from $44,000 to $1.5 million to live on the campus. The $1.5 million, by the way, relates to a place called Hebrew Senior Life in the Newton area of Massachusetts, Boston. Their entrance fees go up to $1.5 million to live on the campus. You can find them for small studio apartments in this region as low as $44,000. So anyway, if you buy the first type of contract, and this is where the industry gets beat up a little bit, because you'll hear the utterance, they take all your money and you never get any of it back. Anybody heard that from, some of you are shaking your head. What people fail to realize in the Type A contract is the reason that happens is because we're amortizing that entrance fee down to 0 in return for life care. Keyword, life care. So it's not fair to the industry or the sector to say they take all your money and you get nothing back. Well, in fact, what you get is a promise and a guarantee that you'll never have to leave, regardless of your ability to pay. So that's one contract. The Type B contract is an entrance fee that may or may not amortize, so you may get part of it back, and the monthly fees are fixed, and there's a refundability of that entrance fee depending on the nature of the contract. I would submit to you that the Type B contracts are going out of style because of the change in the demographics, and also because the Type A and the Type C are so dominant in the sector that the Type B models are few and far between. The last one has become very popular based on the proposition that you do not want them to have all your money, and so you want to get something back. So you pay an entrance fee, but the second bullet's the key one relative to Type A. There's no guarantee for life care. So you move out of Quechee, you move into a retirement community because you have a place in Florida or the Carolinas, but you just don't want to pay property taxes anymore. You don't want to pay maintenance on your house or condo, but you want to live in a community that has all sorts of activities, services. But the Type C contract says, nope, you don't get a guarantee of life care, but you can live there and we'll give you back some of your money. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. And as I said earlier, what's happening now because of this sort of the real estate market is starting to get better, but many of the nonprofits that I'm familiar with say if they have inventory that hasn't been occupied, many of the nonprofits are now saying, just come in and try us out. So many of them, interestingly enough, in the New England area are saying, come in and stay for the winter. We'll have a lot of fun. You don't have to drive to Florida. And the hope of the nonprofit would typically be, if I can get you to come in for the winter, just pay monthly rent, no entrance fee, you might say, holy crap, this is great, and I'm going to stay. Make a whole bunch of friends, and then in the spring, you put your house on the market, and then you decide to move in. Very attractive for the nonprofit organizations that have inventory that, for whatever reason, hasn't turned over. All right? So I said, here's what it costs. $44,000 is the lowest I've seen, up to $1.5 million. The entrance fees are refundable, as I said, based on an amortization schedule. But if you have life care, you can still leave. So if you leave within that amortization period, you will get some of the entrance fee back, but it all depends on when you leave within that sort of cycle. And the recent trends that I've seen across the spectrum is the refund can be 50, 75%, or 90, again, depending on the contract model that you purchase. So the first one, that Type A, remember, you're committing, you've made a decision to stay there until end of life, and you buy that life care contract. Alternatively, you can buy that Type C contract that I mentioned, and for which you get some percentage of the entrance fee back. The kicker on the Type C contract is this phrase right here. So you give me $350,000 for 1,600 square feet. You pay a monthly fee for all the overhead and services, and you say, you know what, I'm going to really move to Florida. I still don't like New England winter. And I say, that's fine. I'll give you your money back when I find someone to move into your unit. And then my phone starts ringing because you and your kids say, hey Tim, how come you haven't sold the unit yet? And I say, well, I don't have anybody to buy it, and my experience in Milton, Mass was that I was actually accused of trying to sell other units, but not their unit. Because if you're waiting to get 90% of $400,000 back, it's a lot of money to have in someone else's hands. But that's the nature of the contract, which is why lawyers are very important. Monthly fees, this is also very controversial. It depends on the overhead of the organization. It depends on the range of services that are provided, but typically they range from $1,500 to $5,000 a month. It's counterintuitive to any business to say, we will guarantee you that the fees won't go up more than 2% every year. When we were developing this program and talking about it, I said, wish that the Quala board would guarantee me that the fees, the dues would not go up more than 2% a year. I don't know if any of the officers are here from the club, but if you can make that promise to me, then I'll take it in a heartbeat. But you can imagine, once you're into the community and you're calculating your living expenses and you say, why are you raising my monthly fee? Well, the answer is health insurance for the employees, cost of living for food, for the dietary department, capital expenses for the plant. So it's unlikely, although it's politically preferable, to say we will never raise your monthly fee more than 2%. My experience tells me, however, because nonprofits like the club are made up of people from within the community, and everybody knows who's on the board. So if you try to raise the fees more than the cost of living adjustment, board members get phone calls. And they say to Bert Kanan, what the heck are you doing? You just raised the monthly fee on my mother by 5%, and the COLA is only 2%. Or the resident will say, as they have to me over the years, gee, Mr. Martin, my Social Security check went up 1.5%, and you just raised the fees 2.5%. That's not fair. And that's a conversation that happens regularly, but it happens. So it's unlikely that they will hardly ever cap the increase, but as a matter of fairness and good fiduciary responsibility and marketing, because what you can imagine is if the nonprofit board just raises the fees 5% a year against the 2.5% COLA adjustment, the talk in the community is going to be, gee, you can move into that place, but once you get in, and I think Bert actually asked me this, you can raise my fees as much as you want whenever you want. And the answer is, yeah, but we're not as dumb as you think, because it's not good public relations and marketing to do that to people who are on fixed income and trust in the nonprofit organization. The committee, when we met, was it yesterday or the day before, we're very intrigued with this late slide that I put in, because this is one of the trends in the country that you'll start hearing about a lot. And it's rooted in the philosophy that I want to stay in my home as long as possible. I never want to move it, right? And everybody sort of believed that that's what we'd like to do in an ideal world. So what's happening most notably in Nashua, New Hampshire, at the Hunt community, is that they're offering you the option, and the place I used to work in Laconia did it as well. You're going to start seeing retirement communities say to you, if you don't want to move, that's fine. Give us 25% is usually the number of the current entrance fee, and we'll qualify you to move when you need to move. Because the other thing that I haven't touched on, and I should have, and I apologize, is there's an economic qualification to live in the community. It costs a lot of money to live, both in terms of entrance fee and monthly fee, but there's also a clinical qualification. Are they healthy enough to live independently? Because what we don't want to do is move folks in that immediately need nursing care. That's not fair to you, and it's not fair to the organization. So the Hunt program and the one in Taylor, the scenario goes like this. I don't want to move, I don't want to move, I don't want to move, but I know someday I'm going to have to move. So I'll give you 25% of the entrance fee based on a unit type, maybe $100,000, and you'll clinically qualify. Here's the important distinction. We're going to qualify you now, and so when you have to move or want to move, you don't have to go through that clinical examination again 2 to 5 years hence. It's a very important option, and so you're buying a life insurance policy, but you get to stay at home. The risk calculation is obvious. Why do I want to give them $100,000 and live in my own home? That's counterintuitive, but not if you think about the healthcare qualification. So you're guaranteed by the organization that you'll get in when you're ready to move based on other circumstances. And I hope that's clear, and if it's not, you should be writing questions down and passing them in. Here we go. Here's the promotion for lawyers. Every nonprofit organization should say to you or your family members, have your lawyer look at the documents. It's a very important contract for the following reason. I don't know of the 1,900 communities across the country, and I'm sure there are more, I don't know any of them that give you an equity position in the acquisition of the unit. What does that mean? It means you're an unsecured creditor behind the bank. So you're telling me, Tim, that I'm going to give you $400,000, I'm going to have a life care contract, but I have no position if the thing goes under. If it goes into receivership, if it goes into bankruptcy, I'm an unsecured creditor behind the primary lender or tax-exempt bond structure, however it may be built, financed. So have your lawyer look at that question. It scares a lot of people away, or it makes them grumpy. I'm giving you all this money, and it's all at risk, right? But that's the way most of it works. You're unsecured, you're behind the bank, typically. What I can tell you, as a matter of fact, is there have been probably less than 10 or 15 bankruptcies all over the country in this sector. The first one and most notable was in Pennsylvania, where the residents of the community, when the community failed, lost their entrance fees. All right? That's not good for the sector, it's not good for the nonprofit, and it's certainly not good for the residents. And my most recent experience, not here, but in my prior organization, we had some workout conversations with the bank. Does anybody know what workout conversations with banks mean? It's not good. It means that there's some trouble sort of underlying the organization. And I'm happy to say I helped fix it, but the conversation with the bank at that juncture was, we don't want to be the lead story on WMUR if we take the thing over. Read between the lines. You've got Health and Human Services that regulates the nursing home piece. You've got a community of 450 people, which is what I ran, all of whom are intelligent, retired business folk, and have kids or have friends that have lawyers. And you have the Attorney General all asking the lender, the bank, what the heck are you doing to all these people? So the utterance by the bank was, we'll figure out a way to make it work because we don't want to face that possibility of bankruptcy or failure. So it's unlikely, and again, it's less than 20 in my experience that have ever gone into Chapter 11, but subsequent to the one in Pennsylvania, all of the banks, all of the regulators, all of the politicians have figured out a way, notwithstanding the legal subordination of the lease to the letter of credit bank, the residents have always been protected. Because it's not a pretty story in the newspaper, in my case, that a bank out of Toronto foreclosed on and took away everybody's life savings because of poor management. Not me, by the way, I did a great job. So when I was talking to one of our fellow members a week ago, who's now enjoying his life in another part of the country, he said, Tim, this looks great, but you forgot one person, and that's your tax advisor and your accountant. After you get over the shock of, I'm going to write you a check for $400,000 and I'm not secured, how does that affect my income? How does that affect my ability to pay? And I was debating whether to put the financial advisor ahead of the lawyer or the lawyer ahead of the accountant. Suffice to say, you need to talk to everybody that has influence over your life savings and your future. So I'm going to stop. How did I do on time?
4:05.
Too fast?
As you have questions, raise it, we'll pick them up, and then Bert has some questions already.
So the only other thing I'd say in closing is, and it's a worn out phrase, if you're thinking about doing this, do it when you can. Don't do it when you have to. If any of you have dealt with or worked with a family member or friend that goes to the hospital because they waited too long to make this decision, the worst thing that can happen is for someone to come running into our office and say, do you have a place for my mother and my father because they can't live safely at home anymore? So that, making a decision under pressure, duress, or financial calamity is never a good time to do it. It's better to do it when you can because you'll enjoy it more. You'll get to enjoy the benefits of the community, and I would urge you, and I'm delighted to see so many of you here today, I would urge you to think about doing it in advance. And the other thing that, referring to our friends in Hanover, you've heard or will hear, there's a long waiting list to get in. That really depends on the unit type that people want to move into, all right? So there may be a long waiting list, but they all want the 2,100 square foot unit, So that's a little bit of a conundrum, that there's a waiting list and there's sometimes vacancies. As I said, I've worked in the nonprofit sector my whole career. I believe in them. All due respect to for-profit developers, nonprofits, just like Paula, are made up of people from the community and for the community, and they're overseen by the Attorney General's office. We've given you 2 links. Dick relies a lot, I think, don't you, Dick, on this one? Right. This is the national association that I've been involved in my whole career. So both of those are good places to start, and I thank you very much. Be nice.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I think Tim did a great job, and he obviously spent a lot of time putting this outline together. Maybe you can applaud one more time for him.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and clarify a couple of these things. It's hard for Tim to have covered all of it in 35 or 45 minutes. Don't run away.
I'm not.
The first question, Tim, for you is, how does long-term care insurance play into this? Can I just give you my long-term care policy and you'll take care of me?
Yeah, long-term care insurance policies are terrific. Make sure you read the details of what it pays and what it doesn't pay. It typically is applicable to the assisted living and the healthcare component of the retirement community. So that the daily, but it also applies, and I'm going to hit the delete button. Many long-term care insurance policies were originally intended to be gap fillers for assisted living and nursing care. But as the products have evolved, and I know for a fact there are fewer companies writing those policies, but the ones that remain also provide what's called a home care benefit. So very important, remember that whole stay at home as long as you can and then move. So long-term care insurance policies are terrific because if you're doing rehab at home after a hip and Medicare pays 100 days of rehabilitation but you need more, the long-term care insurance policy oftentimes and does pay for supplemental services at home. But specific to the question, thus they're also transferable to the communities that we've been talking about.
Can you put up slide 10 for me?
I feel like I'm being deposed by counsel.
Thank you. I guess the first point, as I understand it, in order to go into the independent living aspect of the CCRC, I have to meet some standards of physical and mental health. Be nice.
Yeah, and there's any nurses in the room? Raise your hand if you dare. So think about this as a business. Profit and loss, surplus cash. There's a huge debate, and I don't know if it's ethical, but yeah, we need to make sure you have enough money, right? Big entrance fee, big monthly fee. But, so that's the due diligence on the financing side. The real dilemma comes on the healthcare side. Is there any evidence of dementia? Can they ambulate? What's their sort of long-term healthcare picture look like? And I think the tension comes, the ethical dilemma is, do I want Mr. and Mrs. Kanan to live, well, for sure you, Ann, but I'm not sure about him. And is it the right thing for them clinically? Because if we know they're moving down that spectrum and need a lot of health care soon, is it fair to move them in with that information readily available? So I think the short answer is we look at both, but we want to make sure it's the right fit regardless.
So is that because what I'm going to pay in the independent living is sort of going to carry me through into assisted living and nursing, and so I'm sort of, in a sense, building up a surplus of money from my monthly payments in independent living?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. It's sort of like the meal plan at Queechee. we hope you don't come and eat dinner here. We want you to pay for the fee, but please don't come eat. And it's a good profit and loss scenario. Or at the club I used to be a member of, Peggy will remember this, the membership, I don't think it is Tim Lewis in the room, the members would come to the kitchen and say, I want 10 steaks because I haven't fulfilled my obligation under the meal plan. How did I get from here?
You want me to ask the next question?
No, I know, I want to answer. In a life care community, as differentiated from the type C, remember A versus C, the monthly fee is typically the same regardless of where you live. I'll follow that. It's one fee throughout your entire life. In the type C, it's more a la carte, so you pay for independent living less, you go to assisted, it's more, and you go to nursing, it's more. So yeah, I don't know if I answered it, it was too bad if I didn't.
Well, we'll get you.
I'm sure.
Is there anything that would prevent me from starting out in assisted living?
No. No?
Most of the CCRCs will accept people into assisted living directly without going through the independent living aspect first?
There's a prohibition in New Hampshire that you have to be able to live independently for 90 days before you can move right into assisted living. So each community looks at that differently, but you can move right into the middle of the three pieces.
Let's take a look at slide 12, can we? I think that'll...
Yep.
And just picking up on a point you already made, but when I write this check, you've been using the example of $400,000.
Yep.
Whatever it is, when I write the $400,000 check, where does that money go?
It depends on how old the organization is, and it depends on the financing. Many places just put it in an escrow account. In New Hampshire, you should be happy to know that the Department of Insurance, remember, it regulates that $400,000. The New Hampshire Department of Insurance requires the nonprofit to have a liquid reserve requirement. It's calculated and formulated by bureaucrats. And we have to have on our balance sheet an aggregate sum of money equal to a certain amount of refunds that might happen. But typically it goes in the nonprofit. Oftentimes it goes directly to the bank to pay down the debt. But the requirement for the nonprofit is always to have enough liquid reserve available for people that move out. And the formula does not anticipate the apocalypse. So it's not likely that 100 people would move out at the same time. Goes to the bank.
Are these entrance fees negotiable?
You knew that was gonna happen. You gave him the microphone.
What?
You gave him the microphone.
So I just heard someone say everything's negotiable. They shouldn't be negotiable because the integrity of the whole construct falls apart. But I'm going to say no. The way I have done it, it's not negotiable because the minute you do it for one, the whole deck of cards falls down. But organizations, when they have a lot of vacant units and you need cash flow, you make some concessions, but I would be disappointed if a lot of them are negotiable.
How about even if I said, well, you know what?
Never mind.
Instead of paying you X, I'll pay you Y, but we can amortize it over a different period.
Just stop. The other reason they're not negotiable, and this happens, so you've moved into the retirement community and you're all having coffee in the cafe or lunch by the pool, and you go and say, How much did you pay to move? And guess what? Everybody knows what everybody paid. And damn it, if one person pays less, guess what? They're coming to Tim's office and say, wait a minute. So that's why the integrity of the organization, governed by a board of directors who have a fiduciary duty ultimately to the Attorney General, it's not a good idea to negotiate, but I would be foolish to stand here and say that deals are made. And when you're under that kind of financial pressure to fill up the units or be empathetic to people, I think some people make deals.
Tim, this is obviously an industry or business. Where on the supply-demand curve are we today? I mean, obviously, if there's more CCRCs looking for people than there are people, you can get a better deal. On the other hand, if there aren't very many of them, there's waiting lists and large entrance fees. Where are we today on that supply-demand curve?
I think we're sort of waiting to see what happens to the boomers and waiting to see how quickly the recovery takes place, because for most people that move into these communities, the predicate is sell your house, raise the capital from that. So let's say you sell for $800, you pay $400. People have done the math and have figured out how much they need to live. So I think we're sort of at a standstill at the moment. But there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of strategic thinking about baby boomers, because there's a big wave coming. And I think there are a lot of people in the community that would like to start building and proliferating the model, but I think a lot of people, like in most sectors, they're sitting on a lot of cash and waiting.
In terms of determining or evaluating the financial solvency and strength of a CCRC.
Yep.
First question, are the reputable ones willing to give me their financial statements to look at?
If they don't, I'd think twice about moving in. Remember, all of you probably know that you can get a 990 tax return, which is the nonprofit sort of filing. That's all public information. So if you're a public charity chartered under 501c3, you're obligated in each jurisdiction to put that financial information out. Where I was before in Laconia, and man, God help us, at the end of the year, we publish a certified audit, and we make the audit available to the residents. I can barely read a financial statement, so many people get the financial statement, don't know how to read it, look at all sorts of language and jargon and panic, but the answer is they ought to show it to you, and if they don't, you ought to think hard about why they're not willing to share.
And what 2 or 3 things would you look at on the financials of the CCRC to determine their financial strength?
I think balance sheet is obviously the place you look, but I think more importantly for the layperson, the notes to the financial statement, that really, someone once told me, if you want to learn how to read a financial statement, go to the notes first and then work backwards to the beginning of the audit. But balance sheet for sure, debt structure, reserve requirements. I would say debt structure is a big part of it, because most campuses are sitting on large parcels of land, and you need to know how it's financed and what the debt structure is, because many of them use tax-exempt bond financing, and there's usually a letter of credit bank that ensures that the money that was provided is secure. So I think the balance sheet, reserve requirements are very important against that return of the entrance fee, and then cash flow activities. Where are they spending their money? And the other thing that doesn't happen in most of them is they don't, and I don't know if we do it here, most of them use depreciation as a line item in the financial statements, because you've got this big asset, it depreciates over time. Most of them do not fund replacement reserve items out of operating cash. So the monthly fee you pay generally does not provide for funding what we call a replacement reserve account. So you build this fantastic campus, and then it starts to age in place, the buildings and the streets and the roadways. And so that would be a question, how do you fund capital improvements? Here, we all know how that happens, right? And it's not dissimilar in a retirement community. Do they have the depth of finances to make sure that my roof that's now 25 years is starting to leak? Do they have enough money to fix it?
I have an audience,
These are all from you?
well, no, the good ones are from the audience. I have an audience question here. Is any part of either the entrance fee or the monthly fees tax deductible as medical expenses?
Remember the last slide, talk to your accountant? No, I don't think any nonprofit, that sentence wasn't right, okay? I don't think any nonprofit, no. Many residents and their CPAs take a deduction for the piece of the puzzle attributable to healthcare. And many try to take a piece of the monthly fee attributable to property taxes. Remember, the good news for you when you move in, you're no longer paying property taxes. The nonprofit negotiates a payment in lieu of taxes. They negotiate a tax deal with the jurisdiction, and you're not paying property taxes directly, but that monthly fee, so let's say it's $4,000 a month, you're paying $48,000 a year, and you're asking, can I deduct any of that? Many folks will come to me and say, what portion of the annual budget, the place I ran before was 23 million, what portion of the 23 million is attributable to healthcare or taxes, and you divide that by the number of units, and so on and so on, and some people take deductions, but most nonprofits will not offer tax advice, because that doesn't get the nonprofit administrator anywhere when he says, yeah, I would take 5,000 as a deduction. So people do it, and I think there's tax law and opinions that allow it, but check with your CPA.
Let me come back to the slide now, Tim.
Yep.
And I want to ask you some questions about this Life Care Guarantee.
Yep.
I come in and I give you an entrance fee,
The 400,000.
400,000. Then I still have to pay a monthly fee.
You do.
And let's pick a number. Let's assume that's $3,000 a month.
It needs to be higher.
Okay,
I can pay a lot of money.
let's make it 5,000.
Thank you very much.
So now, how do you know that I'm going to be able to keep paying you that $5,000 a month?
Well, that's a great question. Most nonprofits do an actuarial test. There are actuaries all over the country. And so we look at Bert Kanan, and he tells us how old he is. We look at his investments and his net worth, and we call up our actuary, or the actuary has given us software. We punch it all in a computer, and it projects how long you're going to live. And in your case, Ann, where's Ann? I'll talk to you later. We got the results back. The actuary will tell us expected life expectancy, and we compare it to the finances that you provided us, and we have an inclination as to what's going to happen. And that actuarial software will tell us when you might run out of money, and we rely on that. The problem, and I think I shared it with the committee, we take such good care of people, they live longer than the actuary thinks they're going to live. And maybe underlying this question, or it may be another question, is what if I run out of money? That life care guarantee is real. There's usually a benevolent fund or reserves that anticipate that possibility, and they fund it out of reserves. So you never have to.
Well, I guess I'd want to use your word, drill down a little further.
Okay?
when I come in, I have to give you a financial statement.
You do.
I write the $400,000 check, I'm gonna pay you $5,000 a month, and I give you a financial statement that says I've got a net worth of $10 million. And that ought to cover me. But now, what if I decide that I'm gonna pay college tuition for all my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and I run out of money because I didn't keep that $10 million in the bank, I used it for gifts or whatever I used it for.
Most nonprofits should have in their contract that the provider reserves the right to regularly look at your financials. We do the due diligence in the front end. We don't typically do due diligence along that life expectancy. Most contracts should have language in it that say, we reserve the right to ask for financials whenever we feel like it. It's better language than that for sure, but I think what happens is, and it's happened to me in my career, exactly that. They came in with $4 million, 10 years into their life, they've run out of money, and because they have to come to us and a committee and say, Mr. Martin, I can't pay the monthly fee anymore, and we go, geez, you had $10 million, what happened? If we determine that you've given your money away, we may say, you're not going to get free life care for the rest of your tenancy. Boy, that's a tough one. It's ugly. It doesn't happen very often, but what does happen is I just bought my son a car because my son's car died, and so over time there's a little bit of erosion of that portfolio or net worth, and generally speaking doesn't happen often, but we reserve the right to say sorry, and at that juncture, depending on age, that's when the kids, we hope, right, will come and help mom and dad pay the bill. Because otherwise, guess where you're going to live? Yeah.
So I guess, back to the ugly part, in fact, if I run out of money and you've decided that I have
You're irresponsible.
been imprudent, I'm essentially out.
Correct. I did that where I worked prior to where I am now.
Those are the kind of things we don't want to talk about, but those are the kinds of things that people ought to know about.
Absolutely.
Now, the type C.
I didn't get a Christmas card from that resident.
The type C contract.
Yeah.
That doesn't have any life care with it.
Right.
That's a pay-as-you-go?
Well, it's an entrance fee, some percentage back on reoccupancy, and pay as you go.
And that pay-as-you-go, the fees would escalate as I need more care.
Correct.
Back again to the life care guarantee.
Yep.
I'm guaranteed life care where?
In New Hampshire, remember there was some reference to you can't have skilled nursing care on the campus. If your care needs exceed the capability of the provider, and it's very different from one state to the other, we will guarantee and pay, and people familiar with Genesis, the nursing home in the area? If you had to leave our community because your needs exceeded our capability, in the life care contract, we would negotiate with Genesis the payment, the differential between what I've taken for money and the actual cost of that care in another provider set.
But if I wanted to go someplace nicer,
Then we'll have to talk.
that means I'm on my own.
No, I'll give you X, and you want to pay the difference, then call your son.
You currently work at the Woodlands.
Yes.
Can we use, would it bother you if we use that as an example?
Only if the committee, because this is going to, you have to talk to the,
I just need to use something as an example,
Use it.
and I don't want to continue using Kendall as an example.
Go ahead.
How do I, well, maybe it'd be helpful. Tell the people where the Woodlands is.
It's in Lebanon, part of the Alice Bechdé hospital system.
And you run, that has, the Woodlands is a CCRC?
Yes.
How do I, if I come to the Woodlands, how do I protect myself against a decline in services? And let me tell you what I mean. I come to look at the place, and I could pick Kendall or any place else to answer this question. I come, I look at the place, and you say, gee, one of the nice things we have here is we have, every night for dinner, we have a choice of 4 entrees, one of which is vegetarian, another which is gluten-free.
Yep.
And I think that's great.
Yep.
And now I write you my $400,000 check,
Yep.
and I move in,
Yep.
and there I am, and you start serving me gruel. Gruel is what you serve me.
Yeah, but you wouldn't know what it was anyway. So.
What can I do about that?
Well, first of all, give me a little more credit than that. Because your dinner mate's going to say, wait a minute, doesn't happen. If your healthcare needs require you to be on a restricted diet or a different dietary plan, the chef is going to meet with you and your family and the nurse and the doctor and say, puree the lamb chops to something that's less appetizing than the lamb chop.
Well, when you say this isn't going to happen, it may not happen on your watch, but let's assume it wasn't your place I went into, it was someplace else, and let's assume that their operating expenses went up.
Yeah. Can we change the menu?
Or you limit the menu, or somehow the services decline.
You reserve the right to leave, and that happens. You reserve the right to leave, and you get some of your money back when you leave.
I have a couple more questions.
While Tim is looking at Bert's looking at it, how do you pick the location? What are the sensitivities as to where and which type of unit in the United States you pick?
Well, the short answer is the sector would tell you that most people move within 3 to 5 miles of where they grew up. Number one, that's however they define home, that's where they move to, unless there are children involved that say, Mom and Dad, I want you to be near me. The best example is a gentleman in our facility at 93 just moved to Davis, California a month ago because he'd gotten to the point where the kids are 3,000 miles away and the kids are saying, gee, it's hard to keep an eye on Dad from the West Coast and he's in Lebanon, and he moved to Davis, California. So typically though, people sort of end up living where they've lived a long time because of profession or family members, but the sector would tell you it's within 3 to 5 miles of where they've sort of established their roots. So if you went to Dartmouth and you retired in Hanover, it's not likely, unless there are kids involved, that you're going to move to Scottsdale unless you just want to be in a warm environment. Yeah.
If I enter at the assisted living level, I'm going to pay the fee at that level?
If you're in a type C CCRC, the a la carte model, no life care, you just go into assisted living and you pay the monthly fee with no entrance fee.
Right.
If you're in a type A, it's a whole different scenario, and I don't know what many of them do about that point of entry in the middle of the continuum.
Well, in fact, in a type A, where you have the life care contract, unless the place was in financial difficulty, that is, that they had a lot of vacancies,
Right.
they probably wouldn't want anybody coming in directly to assisted living because they're making their money on the independent living.
That's right, and I don't think the consumer would say, I'm going to give you $400,000 even though I'm not going to enjoy the benefit in an independent component of the campus. So I think in that scenario, most people would not pay the entrance fee. They may go to a terrace community and just live in a standalone assisted living facility. I think if you can't benefit from all three elements of the retirement community, why then would you pay the entrance fee? You would find an alternative environment.
Now, if I wanted to come into the Woodlands
Yep.
and come into the independent living aspect of it,
Yep.
start out in independent living.
Yep.
And I want to go to Florida for 6 months each year.
Yep.
What kind of deal are you going to give me on fees?
He's baiting me, isn't he, Pat? What kind of deal? We would reduce your monthly fee by the equivalent amount of the food cost related to the occupancy. Because I can't shut off certain lights in the building. I mean, the fee is predicated on fixed direct and indirect expenses. The variable, for the most part, is the food. So you're not going to be eating the gruel or whatever you call it. So we would probably deduct the amount for food and say you got to pay for the lights. It's your choice to move to Florida. You got to still have this carry the over.
If I move in.
Then we have parties in his units. Well, or better yet, because we're this unscrupulous developer, we would sublet the unit. He wouldn't know the difference, and we make more money on it.
Is there a rating system for CCRCs?
Yes, it's called the Continuing Care Accreditation Commission, another acronym, CCAC. I don't know who's running that organization, but if you go to the leadingage.org, there is a continuing care accreditation commission. It's equivalent, if you will, to JCAH, Joint Commission on Accreditation of Hospitals. The industry has decided to, well, we've imposed it on ourselves to say, we want you to live in a 5-star, and so there is a commission that evaluates.
If I move in with my wife,
Is that okay, Ann?
and shortly after moving in, they discover that I'm incoherent.
Do you watch Criminal Minds? He even had his eye, he said, I discovered.
I would then presumably go into some form of either assisted living or intermediate care. What happens with my wife, and what happens with the fee?
So let me understand the question. You and Ann move in, and you or she
One
need,
of us needs a different level of care than the other.
well, in your particular case, she's happy that you've gone down, and you don't know any better, and so the answer is, in most places, that's the beauty of living on a campus that has those levels of care. You typically renegotiate the contract. You're in assisted living and she's in independent living, and you get to see each other all the time. So the contract is renegotiated to recognize that change in status.
But when the contract gets renegotiated, the fee goes up because
necessarily.
she's still staying in the
I think
independent unit and I'm in this.
Yeah, something's going to change, and I think it's unique to every retirement community how they handle it. I don't think there's one answer to that question.
This is a question that I think I know the answer to, and I'll let you give the bad
No,
news.
no, you answer it.
The question is, if investments crash in the future, then what would residents without fixed income and risk capital do today?
Call their kids? You mean they no longer have the ability to pay?
I think that's the
The
question.
answer is pretty obvious. It's a hard conversation. Unless we made such a good deal on the front end that we could sort of dip into the... We work very hard, because we are nonprofits, we work very hard on the front end, both on that actuarial life expectancy scenario, it's a huge risk to let people run out of money, because most nonprofits don't have sufficient benevolent funds to support those that have run out of money. The place I ran in Laconia, for 31 people, we were writing off $1.2 million in uncollected fees. Good for them, not good for the P&L and the business. So we work very hard, but you can't solve every situation with one calculation.
One more question.
Thank God.
He paid me to say that.
Let's go back to slide 10. If we're good.
Boy, am I glad he's leaving on Sunday.
Is there any reason why an assisted living facility could not also have a nursing component?
Yeah, it's regulated by Health and Human Services, completely different operating requirements, staffing ratios. In New Jersey, remember I mentioned Sunrise, big developer, and it, as a matter of fact, on the news last night, Massachusetts, a lot of my colleagues are going through issues related to unsafe care provided in assisted living facilities. But Sunrise in New Jersey litigated the question about it's assisted living, licensed, regulated, but the person's needs have now exceeded the sort of plan of care, and they're really nursing home level of care. And Sunrise argued against the regulators that we're going to keep them as long as we can. So everybody's trying to keep you in because it's $5,000 a month, $6,000, and if you move them out, then your business plan starts to crater a little bit.
Okay, we're getting close to the end. You have an evaluation form. We would like you to give us your thoughts. Secondly, the plan is next month in November, we're planning in the early stages to have one on advanced directives. So it's going to be focused similar to this, probably more than one speaker, but that's upcoming. Keep tuned to the website. There was a hand. Dick, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to know if hospice care and palliative care can enter your facility.
Yes, absolutely. It's a big part of the continuum. Many of the providers have it as part of their sort of business model, but more often than not, we encourage that, and we usually work with home health agents, nursing, visiting nurse associations or direct hospice care providers. And I thank you for that question, because we are talking in many cases about end of life, and it's a very important part of letting people die with dignity, and we encourage a hospice to come in and supplement what we're doing. Thank you very much for that.
Good. Well, I think Tim and Bert deserve a round of applause for all good information.